It all began with a newborn girl. A tiny plastic bracelet, its letters faintly printed, was fastened around her wrist. One minute she was safe in her mother's embrace at Providence General Hospital. The next, she had vanished. There were no sounding alarms, no entries in the records, only an unnerving silence and a mother who insisted her child had been taken. Fast forward 25 years, when a young woman slides open a secret compartment in her father's desk. She discovers a worn hospital bracelet and a birth certificate bearing a name she doesn't recognize: Sarah Donovan. This is the incredible tale of a daughter raised with a different identity, a mother who relentlessly continued her search, and the hospital room that concealed a long-buried truth, which is now finally coming to light. But before we delve into the story, I'd love to know where you're all watching from. I make sure to read every comment and truly enjoy connecting with all of you. Thank you. A chilly mist, the exhale of a Boston winter, coated the brick sidewalks and cast a humming glow around the streetlights. The newsroom where Olivia Bennett was an intern felt deserted, with only the persistent click of the last printer serving as a rhythm for the sleepless. Through the window, she saw the Charles River reflecting the city's neon lights into shimmering, distorted lines. An old Motown tune played softly from a forgotten radio on a shelf, its sound mingling with the buzz of the fluorescent lights. She chafed her hands together to bring back some warmth before feeding a microfilm strip into the reader. The machine whirred, a sound like a tape rewinding, as if time itself were trying to reel backward. Headlines scrolled past on the illuminated glass: school board meets, mayor vows repairs. Then, a smaller story caught her attention: Providence General reports record nursery capacity. The accompanying photograph was grainy, showing a line of bassinets with paper name tags. Olivia wasn't sure what made her pause. She had a habit of collecting unusual details, much like others might collect seashells, not for their usefulness, but because they felt like the precursor to a hidden truth. In a corner of the photo, a woman in a light-colored smock glanced at the camera with an expression that was halfway between a smile and an apology. The caption failed to identify her. The scent of dry, slightly sweet newsprint filled the air. Somewhere else in the building, a door clicked shut, its hollow wooden sound causing her to startle. Laughing at her own jumpiness, she collected her clippings and walked out into a light rain that speckled the pavement, resembling grains of rice scattered on a drum. She knew she should have headed home. Instead, she took the Red Line train to Savin Hill, to her late father's duplex, where the scent of his cologne, a mix of cedar and barbershop talc, still lingered in the walls. Daniel Bennett had been a man of precision and order. He kept lists on the refrigerator, had his car's oil changed every 5,000 miles on the dot, and filed his tax receipts in meticulously labeled folders. His office, a compact bedroom lit by a single lamp, maintained that same orderliness, even after his funeral. She switched on the lamp and dust particles danced in its beam like a silent snowfall. On the desk sat a wooden organizer, perfectly squared, holding pens, paper clips, and a magnifying glass he used for reviewing contracts. Olivia traced the edge with her thumb and noticed a slight indentation at the far corner. She remembered drawing there as a child while he worked at his typewriter. He would tap the desk twice, tap, tap, as a gentle reminder whenever she started to fidget. The bottom drawer was stuck. She pulled on it again, listening to the resistant scrape of wood, and then stopped. Her reflection in the dark window appeared older than her 25 years, not from time, but from the weight that goodbyes leave on a person's face. She peered into the small opening and spotted a tiny metal latch that was preventing it from opening all the way. Lying beneath the magnifying glass was a very thin key, taped to a yellowed index card. It felt unusually cold in her hand, like an object that had been kept away from the light. She inserted it into the slot, and the latch gave way with a click that seemed far too loud for the quiet room. The drawer glided open on its felt-lined runners. It was empty inside, just a square of felt, like a tuxedo missing its owner. She tapped the felt and heard a hollow sound. Pressing down on a corner, she felt it give way and then spring back up. It was a false bottom. Using the magnifying glass to direct the light, she found an almost invisible tab where the seam met the wood. She slipped her fingernail beneath it and lifted. The felt came up, revealing a shallow, hidden tray. Inside lay a baby's hospital bracelet, its plastic clouded by age and the stamped letters smudged. Beside it was a folded envelope, so fragile she feared it might disintegrate if she so much as breathed on it. Before she could open it, the radio in the hallway suddenly turned on, emitting a crackle of static. Olivia froze, her heart pounding. The static soon faded, like the end of a vinyl record, and the building returned to silence. She looked down at the bracelet again. Through the milky plastic, she could just make out the first two letters of a name Sa. She carefully picked up the envelope. The flap had been sealed once, then opened and resealed with clear tape that had yellowed to the color of tea. She used a knife to gently slide under the tape, and the paper sighed as it came apart. Something stiff slid forward from within. In that moment of suspense, a thought struck her with the force of a stone dropped into a deep well. Whatever this envelope contained had been waiting for 25 years to shatter the life she had always known. Margaret Bennett called at precisely 9:11 p.m. as she always did, as if her punctuality could hold the chaotic world together. "Did you eat?" she asked, her voice soft and caring. "I had a bagel," Olivia lied, her gaze fixed on the envelope. "I'm at Dad's just finishing up with the boxes." There was a brief silence. "You don't have to do that tonight." "I know," Olivia replied. What she didn't say was, "I found something in his desk, and I'm terrified of what it might reveal about me." After ending the call, she took a deep breath, trying to manage the feeling her therapist called anticipatory grief. The bracelet sat in the lamplight, its plastic as hazy as a winter window pane. Along its edge, she could make out the manufacturer's brand, the same one she had seen on newborns during her internship shadowing a city reporter last spring. Such details tended to latch onto her memory and remain there. On paper, Olivia was just an intern tasked with rewriting obituaries and community announcements. In reality, she possessed the subtle skill of a true reporter, finding the one clerk who knew which basement stored which records, or charming a librarian into coaxing a microfilm machine back to life with a rubber band and a weary sigh. She was skilled at filing records requests and knew how to wait patiently without losing the trail of a story. She maintained a personal collection of mysteries, both her own and those she had stumbled upon. On the desk was a photograph of Daniel and Margaret at a beach on Cape Cod, their feet sinking into the wet sand at the water's edge. He was wearing the baseball cap that Olivia had taken for herself after the funeral. She still found herself reaching for its brim when anxiety crept into a room. Margaret's smile in the photo was one that consciously chose hope over hard evidence. They had always been open about Olivia being adopted. "You were chosen," Margaret had told her when she was 6, a phrase that served as a protective shield until she reached middle school and her questions began to have a sharper edge. A draft whistled through the old window frame. Olivia slipped her finger under the envelope's flap and pulled out a single sheet of paper. It was a birth certificate, its official border faded by the sun, the state seal pressed into paper as soft as a well-worn dollar bill. The header read Rhode Island Department of Health. The hospital listed was Providence General. The date was from 25 years ago and the time was 2:14. The space after child's name was a blur of ink, as if a name had been written and then immediately wiped away while still wet. Under Mother, it simply said E. Donovan, with the first name concealed by a neat strip of correction tape, now curled at the edges. The attending physician was listed as Richard Wallace, M.D. Her heart began to race. Wallace was a name from her notes, a quote from last fall about a clinic in Dorchester that was closing. He had been polite, cautious, and willing to speak off the record. She never knew he had once practiced in Providence. On the back, Daniel's lawyer had stapled a note to be opened by OB when she is ready. The handwriting was Daniel's, perfectly neat. Tucked beneath the staple was the business card of a private investigator from Providence, at least a decade old, its corners softened from years of being handled and stored away. In the top drawer, she discovered a small spiral notebook containing her father's list for January, which never extended into February. The first page was titled, Questions for Margaret, followed by 4 bullet points. 1. Adoption records. 2. Birth hospital. 3. Why Providence. 4. Bracelet. Who brought it home? The final entry was a full sentence. Tell her when she's done looking for reasons to leave. He had never spoken those words to her. He must have been planning to. She felt an urge to call Margaret and ask all her questions at once, but another part of her wanted to wrap these documents in a towel and hide them under the sink. She was familiar with both these conflicting impulses, the drive to charge ahead and the instinct for neat denial. Her phone vibrated. It was a text from her editor, Lena Morales. You still up? City Desk needs you on a nursing shortage story tomorrow. Also, a reader tip about Providence General came in. Interested. Providence General. The name resonated with a strange significance. She quickly typed back, yes. Lena responded with contact information for a retired records clerk who was willing to discuss how babies were once checked in and out of the hospital with the casualness of library books. The clerk's name was Mrs. Hanley, and she lived in South Boston. The wind rattled the window, making the sash groan. Olivia placed the certificate and bracelet in a box and slid the false bottom back into place. As she pushed the drawer shut, something caught her eye. A second, thinner envelope had slipped behind the tray. She carefully retrieved it. On the front, in Daniel's handwriting, was a single instruction. If you find Dr. Wallace, ask him about room 417. Room numbers in a hospital are a kind of secret code. Labor rooms are grouped together. Nurseries are protected behind cheerful glass walls. And upstairs in the dark, the records are kept. She flipped the note over, half expecting to find a map, but it was blank. Outside, a car door slammed, followed by the crunch of footsteps on the damp pavement. Olivia looked at the window and saw only her own reflection and the blurred red glow of taillights. Back at the desk, she noticed a faint purple municipal stamp on the birth certificate, delayed filing. A shiver ran down her spine. Delayed implied that someone had needed time, either to correct something or to conceal it. She reached for the lamp. A gust of wind slipped under the window sash and lifted the top sheet of paper, like a hand raising a curtain. For a fleeting moment in the angled light, she thought she could see the faint impression of a first name under the correction tape, the way an erased pencil mark can still leave a trace. It looked like a name that was, impossibly, completely different from Olivia. Her phone rang, its screen casting a blue light across the room. It was Margaret calling again. It was exactly 10 p.m. The retired records clerk resided in a slender South Boston row house that carried the faint aroma of mothballs and lemon-scented cleaner. Olivia stood on the stoop, the cold air sharp in her lungs, clutching the manila folder that held the birth certificate. A lace curtain in the window moved just before the door swung open. Mrs. Hanley. The woman was petite, with her cardigan buttoned up to her chin and eyes as sharp and bright as a bird's. Come in before all the heat gets out, she said, guiding Olivia into a living room filled with porcelain angel figurines. Olivia perched on the edge of a floral sofa as Mrs. Hanley poured tea from a teapot adorned with painted violets. So, you have an interest in Providence General, the woman began. My father left me some documents, Olivia explained cautiously. I was born there, or at least I think I was. Mrs. Hanley stirred her tea, the spoon tapping against the porcelain with a rhythmic beat. Providence General shut down its maternity ward in the late 90s. There were too many irregularities, as they called them. Back in those days, I was in charge of admissions. The babies had their bracelets and the mothers had matching tags. It was a simple system, but every so often the numbers wouldn't align. We'd find a bracelet without a corresponding tag or a tag without a baby. A chill went through Olivia. Was there ever an investigation? The administrators dismissed it all as clerical mistakes. Computers were just being introduced, but those of us on the floor knew better. Some nights I would overhear nurses whispering about a room that had no chart, no assigned mother, a room they used for transfers. The word hung in the air with a heavy weight. Do you happen to remember the room number? Olivia asked. Mrs. Hanley's brow furrowed as her gaze drifted toward the mantelpiece, which was crowded with her angel collection. 417. It's strange that you ask. I've never been able to forget that number. Olivia's breath caught in her throat. The note from her father asked him about room 417. Mrs. Hanley leaned closer. One night, I came across a whole pile of forms all bearing the same signature at the bottom. Dr. Richard Wallace. He was the one who approved everything. He was a highly respected man, but he signed off on more delayed filings than any other doctor. The tea sat cooling in its cup, untouched. Olivia closed the folder and held it tightly against her lap. "Do you believe children were stolen?" The old clerk's lips quivered. "I believe that some mothers left that hospital without the babies they had given birth to, and some babies left with people who had never carried them." Standing on a carpet woven with a pattern of roses, Olivia felt her sense of balance falter as if the floor had suddenly tilted. She thanked the woman, assured her of her discretion, and walked back out into the night where the streetlights hummed like captive insects. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from Lena. "Tip checks out tomorrow." She replied, "Yes, found something. Will explain." On her way back to the train station, Olivia passed a graffiti-covered newspaper box. Someone had scrawled a single word in marker missing. The letters seemed to bleed together as if trying to retreat into the darkness. At the station, she dug for coins to use in a vending machine. A boy of about 12 watched her with an intensity that made her feel uneasy. His hoodie was far too large for him, and his sneakers were starkly new and white. As she looked up, he spoke. "You dropped this," he said, holding out his empty hand. Before she could say anything, the train roared into the station, shattering the platform's silence. The boy slipped away, disappearing into the crowd and the shadows. On the ride home, Olivia unfolded the certificate once more. The correction tape over the mother's name had begun to peel away, revealing the faint outline of E. Donovan. She traced the letters with her fingernail. Donovan. She couldn't recall any Donovans in her family, yet the name scratched at her memory like the lyrics of a half-forgotten song. The train screeched to a halt at her stop. She put the certificate back in her pocket and stepped out into the damp darkness, her reflection shattering across the puddles on the ground. Once home, she opened her laptop and typed Providence General Hospital Room 417. The search results were fragmented: a demolition notice, a local blog post about asbestos removal, and an archived headline: "Mother claims baby switched at birth." She clicked the link. The story was from 25 years ago. The mother's last name was Donovan. Her hand trembled as it rested on the keyboard. The article quoted a nurse who claimed the baby was healthy and present one moment and then simply gone the next. The hospital administration had dismissed the mother's claim as a case of hysteria. The screen flickered, and a notification appeared: battery low, 5%. She fumbled for her charger. When she looked back at the screen, the article was gone. Page not found. The laptop screen cast a pale blue light in the dark apartment, a rectangle of disappearing truth. Olivia hit the refresh button. Error 404. She copied the headline and searched again. Nothing. It was as if someone had reached through the internet and physically torn the story from existence. Her charger finally clicked into the port and the laptop's fan whirred to life. She searched again: Donovan Providence General baby missing. After several dead ends, she found an old PDF, a scanned clipping from a Rhode Island newspaper. The headline was cut off, but the body of the text read, "The Donovan family continues to insist." Her heart pounded against her ribs. The document ended abruptly mid-sentence, as if the scanner had been intentionally stopped. A floorboard creaked in the kitchen. Olivia went still. She hadn't made dinner. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator. Then silence. Clutching her laptop like a shield, she walked into the living room. No one was there. A draft from under the door carried the damp smell of the city. She tried to convince herself she was just exhausted, that grief had a way of turning echoes into ghosts. Nevertheless, she slid the chain lock into place and went around checking all the windows. Back on her desk, the hospital bracelet lay curled like a question mark. She picked it up and tried to fit it around her wrist, but the plastic barely made it halfway. In its faded strip, the faint letters seemed to reappear. If that vanished article was true, then her name, Sarah Donovan, had been concealed not just by a piece of tape, but by 25 years of silence. The following day, Olivia got to the newsroom ahead of schedule. the unpleasant taste of coffee still lingering in her mouth. Her colleague, Lena, gestured for her to come closer. "Regarding that tip," Lena said, "you should definitely bring a recorder." She then gave Olivia a piece of paper that had an address on it, located in the city of Providence. "A retired nurse is saying she witnessed things she was not supposed to see," Orley explained. The name C. Donovan was written on the paper. Olivia felt her throat tighten. "Donovan?" she asked. "She didn't specify," Lena replied, "only that she would provide details." Lena looked at her with a questioning gaze. "Are you all right?" Olivia answered, "Yeah," but the sound of her voice didn't reassure Lena, nor did it convince herself. The drive heading south seemed to take much more than an hour. Rain made the I-95 slick, and the windshield wipers moved back and forth with a weary beat. In her mind, she practiced the questions she would ask, but her thoughts kept circling back to a single one: what if she was not Olivia at all? Providence appeared as a gray expanse beneath a sky thick with low-hanging clouds. The address took her to a humble home with paint flacking off the walls and a front porch that was beginning to sag. Olivia parked her car, mentally reviewed her press identification, and walked up the creaking steps. The door swung open before she had a chance to knock. A woman stood in the dim light of the doorway. She appeared to be in her late 40s with auburn hair streaked with gray, and her eyes were the exact same color as Olivia. "You must be the reporter from the newspaper," the woman stated. "Please come in." The living room had a soft scent of lavender. Beside the sofa, old magazines were piled high, creating tall towers. A crooked photograph was hanging on the wall, showing a family of 5 having a picnic. The youngest child in the picture had their face turned away from the camera. "My name is Claire Donovan," the woman said as she took a seat in an armchair. "I was an employee at Providence General during the time the baby started to go missing." Olivia's heartbeat faltered. Donovan was the name that repeatedly appeared like a marker in the water. Claire went on, her voice quiet. "We were instructed to simply obey the instructions. Move the newborn babies, ask no questions. There were nights when I personally carried the bassinets down to room 417. The mothers would be fast asleep under sedation. When they awoke, we informed them that the baby had passed away due to complications. The majority of them accepted our story, but some of them did not." Olivia gripped her recorder tightly, its red recording light blinking like a tiny heart. "Why have you decided to speak up now?" she asked. "Because the individuals who gave those commands are now either deceased or near death," Claire answered, "and also because one of those infants was my own." Her words seemed to fracture the quiet atmosphere of the room. The sound of rain beating against the windows grew louder. Olivia felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. Claire leaned in closer, her eyes filled with tears but her gaze steady. "My daughter was taken from me 25 years ago. Her name was Sarah." The recorder continued to capture the ensuing silence, which was so profound it felt like one could drown in it. Olivia had an urge to flee, to reject the story, to retreat into the comforting falsehood of being a chosen, adopted, and loved child. However, the bracelet inside her pocket seemed to press against her leg, a physical reminder that told her otherwise. Claire retrieved a shoe box from a drawer and placed it between them. Inside were photos of a hospital bassinet, a baby swaddled in a blanket with stripes, and a birth certificate that was only partially filled out. At the very bottom of the box was another bracelet, identical to the one Olivia had. It had the same discolored plastic and the same imprinted letters, representing 2 pieces of the same evidence. Claire's voice became a near whisper. "I have spent 25 years searching for you." Olivia's breathing became shaky. She had 1,000 questions she wanted to ask, but only one managed to come out, sounding vulnerable and small. "How can you be sure it's me?" Claire opened her hand to reveal a necklace with a silver star pendant which had become dull over the years. "They didn't take this from you," she said. "You had it on when they took you away, and I have noticed you wearing it in photographs of yourself." Olivia instinctively touched the chain around her neck. It was the pendant she always wore, a present that Margaret had told her was with her when she was a baby. The room seemed to spin, her eyesight became blurry, the recorder's light blinked, and the rain pounded outside. In that moment, Olivia understood the truth she had been avoiding since she first opened the drawer. Her entire existence was founded on an act of theft. The intense rain had subsided to a light drizzle. As Olivia stepped back onto the porch, Claire's words followed her into the evening. "I have spent 25 years searching for you." She drove without the radio on, her headlights sweeping across the wet blacktop as a jumble of thoughts crashed into each other in her mind. She remembered Margaret's voice on the phone just the night before, Daniel's tidy handwriting on the note, the bracelet, the pendant, the sealed envelope, and now Claire Donovan, who claimed to be her mother with proof that seemed to fit all too perfectly. When she got back to her place in Boston, Olivia sat at her kitchen table, surrounded by the various pieces of her shattered life. There were the two bracelets, the birth certificate, and the photos from the shoe box that Claire had allowed her to photograph with her phone. She laid them out as if they were pieces of a puzzle, but the picture they were forming wouldn't come into focus. She knew she needed more than just objects and a story of grief. She needed confirmation. The next morning, she checked out the newsroom's recorder once more and drove to a nursing home in Quincy, which was now the residence of Dr. Richard Wallace. She had contacted him beforehand, pretending to be a journalist doing a story on hospitals that had shut down. On the phone, his voice showed no signs of distrust, only weariness. The nursing home had a strong smell of bleach and overcooked vegetables. Wallace was sitting in a sunlit room with a cardigan over his shoulders and his white hair neatly combed. His hands had a slight tremor as he repositioned his glasses. "Providence General," Olivia started, turning on the recorder. "You were the head physician in the maternity unit," he confirmed with a nod. "From 93 to 98, she continued. "There are whispers about some irregularities. Babies that were not accounted for." His gaze quickly shifted to the blinking red light on the recorder. "Whispers, administrative delays," he said dismissively. She persisted. "Room 417. The mention of that room made him react as if he were choking back a cough. He leaned back in his chair and gazed out the window toward a bird feeder. "You have certainly done your research." Olivia had to force herself to swallow. "Did you give authorization for the transfers of newborn infants?" A long silence followed. Eventually he spoke, his voice as brittle as old paper. "We were informed that they were adoptions, that the biological mothers had agreed, and that all the documentation was correct. But in the late hours of the night, when the hallways fell silent, I would sign documents that I was forbidden to read. Infants were taken out through side exits. The nurses would whisper among themselves. I convinced myself it was an act of kindness." "Kindness?" Olivia questioned. "There were mothers who were unable to care for their children, or at least that's what we were told, and there were families desperate for a child. I persuaded myself that I was just helping to smooth out one of the difficult aspects of life, but deep down I knew." He massaged his temple. "We weren't finding homes for babies. We were erasing their very existence." Olivia's heart pounded in her chest. "Do you recall the Donovan case?" His eyes closed. "Yes." "The mother kept insisting that her baby had been stolen. She yelled it all through the corridors. The security staff had to remove her. I was informed that she was mentally unstable, but I had seen the documents. The infant's name was Sarah. That particular file vanished the following day." The air felt thick in her throat. "Doctor," she said in a whisper, "what if I were to tell you that Sarah Donovan is still alive?" His hands began to shake so much that she worried his teacup would fall and break. "In that case," he said, "someone has been living a lie for 25 years, and I have as well." Olivia turned off the recorder. The silence that filled the room afterward felt more significant than any confession. When she departed, Wallace was still standing by the window, a man seemingly crushed by the burden of his past actions. On her way back, she tried calling Margaret. It went to voicemail again. On her third try, Margaret finally picked up. "Olivia, honey, is something the matter?" Olivia held the steering wheel tightly. "We have to talk, right now." Margaret consented to meet later that evening at the duplex, in the room that had been Daniel's office and still held the scent of cedar. Olivia got there early and walked back and forth in the hallway until she saw the sweep of headlights across the window. Margaret ascended the steps with slow movements, her umbrella dripping water, her face looking ashen. Inside, Olivia laid out all the evidence on the desk: the certificate, the bracelet, and the photographs that Claire had shown her. "Tell me the truth," she said, her voice unsteady. "Who am I?" Margaret's hands hovered over the items as if she feared they would burn her if she touched them. "I loved you," she whispered. "From the very first night that Daniel brought you in through that door. You were crying, and then you stopped. You settled into my arms as if you had always been meant to be there." "That's not an answer to my question," Olivia retorted. Margaret's shoulders slumped in defeat. "We desperately wanted to have a child. We went through years of seeing doctors, undergoing treatments, and saying prayers. Then one evening, Daniel returned home from Providence. He explained that there had been a complication and a mother was unable to care for her baby. He assured me it was all legal and proper." "Did you ever ask to see any paperwork?" Olivia pressed. "I did ask," Margaret admitted. "He told me it would be provided later, and once I was holding you, I stopped caring about it. You were our child. I convinced myself that nothing else was important." Tears began to run down her face. "I was mistaken." Olivia pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "Claire Donovan claims that I am her daughter. She has the other bracelet and the same necklace. Dr. Wallace has confessed that there were illegal transfers." Margaret began to cry into her hands. "I had no idea, I promise you. If I had been aware that another mother was out there looking." Olivia interrupted her. "Then why did Dad keep the birth certificate hidden? What was the purpose of the notes? Why did he wait until after he was gone?" Margaret's lack of response was an answer in itself. Olivia clenched the bracelet and necklace in her hand. "Don't you see? My entire life has been a lie." Margaret tried to reach for her across the desk, but Olivia pulled away. "Please," Margaret pleaded, "no matter what you find out, don't forget that we raised you with love. That part was real." Olivia's breathing was shaky. She wanted to think that love could be an excuse for lies, but the documents on the desk felt heavier than any amount of affection. She stood up suddenly. "I'm heading to Providence. I have to see room 417. Margaret's eyes grew wide. "That hospital has been shut down for years." "In that case," Olivia said, "there shouldn't be anything to hide." That night, Olivia drove south once more. Providence General stood like a massive, abandoned structure, its windows covered with boards and its sign hanging precariously from rusted bolts. Rain drummed on the roof of her car, sounding like tapping fingernails. She parked her car near the chain-link fence and discovered an opening that others had previously created to get inside. The hallways within smelled of mold and plaster dust. Long strips of paint were peeling from the walls. The silence was heavy, disturbed only by the beam of her flashlight cutting through the air, which was filled with dust particles that looked like ash. She followed the faded numbers on the walls: 401, 405, 411. Room 417 was situated at the very end of the hallway, its door warped and stuck in its frame. She pushed against it with her shoulder until the frame creaked and finally yielded. The room was compact and had tiled walls, with a single window that was cracked. One wall was lined with cabinets. On the floor was a rusted hospital crib with its wheels locked in place. A blanket inside it was so decayed it had turned into mere threads. Olivia's flashlight beam landed on a clipboard that was stuck behind one of the cabinets. She managed to pull it out. The pages were stuck together from dampness and the edges were crumbling. However, on the very first page, a name was still visible, faint but clear: Donovan, Sarah, transferred. Her chest tightened. It was proof. Suddenly she heard footsteps echoing down the corridor. Olivia quickly switched off her light, her heart pounding as dust motes danced in the air. A silhouette appeared in the doorway. "Hello," a voice called out. It was a man, older, and his voice sounded tense. "Is anyone in here?" Olivia didn't breathe. The person stepped into a patch of moonlight that was filtering through the broken window. It was Dr. Wallace, his face pale and his sweater damp from the rain. "You should not be in here," he said, his voice shaking. "There are individuals who do not want this to be brought to light." "Then what are you doing here?" Olivia questioned. He held up a folder that was protected by a plastic covering. "Because the weight of guilt is heavier than the burden of secrets," he said, "and also because if you are who I believe you are, then this file is rightfully yours." He passed it to her, then cast a worried look down the hall. But you must be cautious. Files have a way of disappearing, and so do witnesses. Before Olivia could say anything, a loud crash came from the other end of the building. It was the sound of metal hitting tile, and it sounded intentional and close. Wallace jumped at the noise. We are not alone. The crash reverberated through the empty corridors, seeming to bounce off the tile and steel surfaces like a gunshot. Olivia's pulse quickened. Wallace grabbed her arm. "Be quiet," he whispered, his eyes nervously scanning the area. But the sound repeated, deliberate and nearer this time, followed by the sound of metal being dragged along the floor. Olivia switched her flashlight back on, the beam shaking in her hand. It moved across graffiti, shards of glass, and the silhouette of a medical gurney that had been knocked over. A figure came into view at the far end of the hall, a man wearing a dark raincoat with the hood pulled low, obscuring his face. His steps were unhurried and calculated, as if he was already aware of who was present. Wallace's breathing hitched. "We need to leave." But Olivia remained frozen in place, holding the folder as if it were a shield. The man came to a halt just outside the reach of her flashlight beam. "You're meddling in things you shouldn't be," he said, his voice gruff and accustomed to command. "Room 417 is off limits." "Who are you?" Olivia asked firmly. "I'm the one who maintained control when everyone else was falling apart," he answered. He took a step forward, and she could see his face was wrinkled and he had a strong jawline. "I worked security at Providence General. Back in those days, I was the one who moved the bassinets. The doctors gave the instructions and the nurses did as they were told. I made sure the door stayed closed." Wallace grew tense. "Carson," he said under his breath. The man gave a slight smile. "So you do remember. You always had a habit of looking the other way, didn't you, doctor?" Olivia's throat felt tight. "Why are you following us now?" "Because certain secrets should remain buried," Carson replied. He tapped the edge of the doorframe. "People paid a lot of money for silence. A great deal. And I have no intention of letting all that be ruined just because some girl decides she needs to know the truth." "I'm not just some girl," Olivia retorted. "I'm one of them, one of the infants you assisted in making disappear." Her words shot through the air like a bolt of lightning. Carson blinked, then cocked his head. "In that case, you ought to be grateful to me. Without our help, you would have been raised in utter chaos." Wallace took a step forward. "She has a right to know who she is." Carson's smile vanished. "Identity is irrelevant. What matters is survival, and survival requires forgetting." Olivia's hand tightened on the folder. She aimed her flashlight at Carson's chest, where his jacket was shiny with rain. In his left hand, he was holding a metal object, a crowbar, rusty but still formidable. "You need to go," he said, "right now, before you discover more than you can handle." For a brief moment, everything was still. Then more footsteps were heard, but they were not Carson's. From the direction of the stairwell, another person emerged. It was Claire Donovan. She was drenched, with her hair stuck to her face and a fiery look in her eyes. "Pay no attention to him," she yelled. "He is the one responsible for your disappearance," Carson swore quietly. Claire rushed forward, positioning herself between Olivia and the man. "You have been hiding for 25 years. For 25 years I have had to live without my daughter. That all stops tonight." The crowbar made a scraping sound on the floor. "If you stay, you'll wish you hadn't walked in here." Olivia's flashlight beam moved erratically between them. The damp air was filled with the smell of rust and mildew, but underneath that she detected a sharp, acrid scent. It was smoke, coming from down the hallway, faint but growing stronger. Someone else was in the building. Carson turned his head toward the smell, momentarily distracted. Claire seized Olivia's wrist. "We have to run." But Olivia refused, not without knowing the truth. She held up the folder. "What is in this?" Wallace's voice was strained. "Those are the transfer records. They contain names, dates, and signatures, enough evidence to confirm everything." Carson lunged, but Olivia quickly moved aside, holding the folder tightly. Wallace fell against the crib and Claire pushed Carson with all her might. The crowbar hit the tile with a loud clang. The noise attracted more footsteps, these ones heavier and from multiple people. A feeling of dread washed over Olivia. More than one person was approaching. Two shadows grew longer in the corridor. A man's voice called out, "Carson!" Carson swore again. "Get out of here," he yelled at Olivia. But she was frozen because the second voice, a softer female one, was one she recognized. "Margaret!" "Olivia!" The flashlight trembled in her hand. "Mom!" Margaret appeared in the broken doorway, her raincoat soaking wet and her eyes filled with terror. Following her was another man dressed in a suit and carrying a leather briefcase. He had an official and well-groomed appearance that seemed completely out of sync with the surrounding decay. Carson let out a sigh of relief. Finally, someone who gets it. Margaret's eyes darted from the folder in Olivia's hands to Claire, her lips trembling. The man in the suit pushed his glasses up his nose. "Miss Bennet, you have come across records that were never intended to be found. I strongly suggest you hand them over." Olivia's grip on the folder became tighter. "And what if I refuse?" The man offered a cold, thin smile. "In that case, you will discover just how far powerful families are willing to go to safeguard reputations that have been built on deceptions." Her heart pounded against her ribs. Looking at Claire's desperate expression, Margaret's guilt, Wallace's shame, and Carson's threatening posture, Olivia understood that the truth was far more complex than just stolen infants. It was an entire system, a well-oiled machine, and she had just exposed its inner workings. The silence in room 417 became almost suffocating, punctuated only by the sound of rain dripping from a crack in the ceiling. Olivia's breathing was heavy, and she held the folder to her chest as if it were a piece of armor. Margaret took a single, tentative step forward. "Olivia, please give him the file. You have no idea how much danger you're in." Claire's voice was sharp and clear. "Don't you even think about it. Her entire life is documented in those papers." Olivia's throat felt like it was on fire. "Mom, are you a part of this?" Margaret shook her head vigorously. "No, I never wanted any of this, but Daniel, he made commitments. He claimed it was the only way. After his death, they approached me. They told me that if the truth were to come out, it would ruin you." The man in the suit cleared his throat, his tone composed and calm. "What your mother is trying to say is that certain parts of history are better left buried. Adoptions were organized. Records were lost. Why bother reopening old wounds when a young woman had a safe, educated, and loving upbringing?" Olivia's voice broke, "Because that was not a decision for you to make." Carson shifted his weight, the crowbar now hanging loosely by his side. Wallace was slumped against the crib, his face a pale shade of gray from guilt. Claire stood there shaking, her hands clenched into tight fists. Margaret reached for her again. "Honey, please, I was the one who raised you. I put bandages on your knees, I read you stories at bedtime, and I comforted you through every sickness. That was all real." "This," she said, gesturing to the bracelet and the certificate, "this will only lead to your heartbreak." Olivia's vision was clouded by tears. "But I'm already heartbroken." The suited man moved closer, his voice now lower. "Miss Bennet, there is something you need to be aware of before you make a reckless choice. The records you are holding do not only name your mother. They also include the names of donors, judges, and politicians, influential men and women who made sure that Providence General prospered. If those names become public, you won't just be finding your past. You'll be starting a war with people who bury their problems more permanently than a grave." Olivia's legs felt weak. For a fleeting moment she thought about giving up, handing him the file, and going back to the half-truths she had been living. But then Claire spoke, her voice filled with raw emotion. "They told me the same things, that it would be safer for me if I didn't resist, that no one would take the word of a single mother. And because of that, I lost you for 25 years. I will not let them take you from me again." Carson's patience ran out. He charged forward, raising the crowbar. Olivia dodged him, clutching the folder. Claire pushed Carson to the side. Wallace yelled out. The suited man swore and stumbled backward. Margaret let out a cry. The room erupted in a flurry of motion. The folder slipped from Olivia's grasp, and its pages scattered across the damp tile floor like fallen leaves. Carson lunged for them, but Olivia was faster, scraping her knees as she dove. She managed to grab one of the sheets, and the name at the top was faintly visible in her flashlight beam. "Donovan, Sarah, transfer approved." "Wallace," R. Wallace choked out, "that's my signature." Claire's scream ripped through the air. "You signed the papers that took my daughter away." Wallace staggered, clutching his chest. I was following orders. You made a choice, Claire spat back. Olivia quickly gathered as many of the pages as she could and stuffed them inside her jacket. Carson managed to snatch one away from her, tearing it in half. Margaret fell to her knees, attempting to grab Olivia's arm. Please stop this before you destroy everything, Margaret pleaded. Olivia's eyes met hers. Everything was already destroyed on the night I was taken. For a second, everyone in the room was frozen, caught in a moment between the past and the present, between guilt and the will to survive. Then the bright glare of headlights shone through the broken window, illuminating their faces. Tires screeched to a halt outside and voices could be heard shouting. Claire's eyes widened. The police! The suited man smirked. Not exactly. Dark figures began to enter the corridor, men in heavy coats who moved with the confidence of people who were not afraid of the consequences. One of them barked out an order, "Get the files." Carson dropped his crowbar, a look of relief on his face. Margaret covered her mouth with her hand. Wallace slumped against the wall. Claire grabbed Olivia's wrist. We need to leave right now. But the men were already blocking the doorway. Olivia held the torn pages under her jacket, her heart pounding against her ribs. For 25 years, the truth had been hidden. Now it was fighting its way out, and powerful people were desperately trying to force it back down. The suited man gestured with a calm, almost courteous motion. Miss Bennet, please come with us. We can handle this without any further trouble. Olivia's flashlight beam shook. She realized this was the turning point. The moment her life as Olivia Bennet was over, and Sarah Donovan's battle for the truth was just beginning. She made a run for the window. The sound of shattering glass filled the air as cold rain hit her skin. Claire was right behind her, yelling her name. From inside, men were shouting commands, and the sound of their boots echoed on the tile floor. The folder was lost, but tucked inside Olivia's jacket, the torn pages felt like a second heartbeat against her chest. She landed hard on the ground outside, her hands sinking into the mud. Claire landed next to her. In the distance, the faint sound of sirens could be heard. They weren't the police, not yet, but they offered a glimmer of hope. They ran into the darkness as the headlights of the cars swept across the front of the hospital behind them. Shadows pursued them, but Olivia did not turn back. Because for the very first time, she wasn't just escaping from lies. She was carrying the truth. As a cold rain fell on their faces, Olivia and Claire hurried away from the dark hospital toward the only beacon of light on the Street A diner with steamy windows and a glowing coffee sign. Once inside, the vinyl seats squeaked under their weight. A radio in the background softly announced the weather forecast. Olivia slid into a booth, her trembling hands pressing the torn paper pages flat against the table. They won't give up, Claire said, keeping her gaze fixed on the door. But you don't have to face this by yourself, Olivia replied. I don't even know who I am anymore. She took the star-shaped pendant out from under her collar. This belonged to you, Claire explained. It was my mother's before it was mine. I pinned it to your baby blanket so that the world would always remember your name. The waitress came over and poured them coffee. Olivia inhaled the warm steam before taking a picture of each torn page with her phone and sending the images to Lena. Her message read, if I don't make it back, publish these and contact the Attorney General. We will get a DNA test, Claire stated. Not because I need it to believe, but because you deserve to have proof. Olivia agreed with a nod. Daniel left notes about room 417. He was going to tell me everything once I had stopped searching for excuses to leave him. I believe he was trying to fix what he had done. Claire added, in that case, he tried to save you on 2 occasions, first by concealing the file, and second by leaving you a path to find it. They arrived at the newsroom just as the sun was rising. Lena was waiting for them at the entrance, wearing a hoodie and holding a legal pad. You're safe, she said with a sigh of relief, but her expression changed when she saw the pages in Olivia's hand. We need to copy these, back them up, and call our lawyers. Please sit down. While the copier was warming up, Olivia spotted a white envelope pinned to the office bulletin board, addressed to the city desk. It mentioned room 417. Lena opened it to find a short message: ask Wallace about room 417. Do not trust the hospital's lawyers. DB. Daniel Bennett, Olivia whispered his name. We followed that lead and it took us to Mrs. Hanley, Lena said gently, and to Claire. She gave Olivia's shoulder a comforting squeeze. Your father initiated this. He didn't know how to reverse his actions, but he made an effort. At that moment, something inside Olivia broke. She could almost hear the old, familiar sound of his fingers tapping on wood, and she allowed herself to cry until she could breathe normally again. Lena handed her a prepaid burner phone. Use this phone from now on. I've scheduled a preliminary DNA test with a 24-hour turnaround. Just then, Olivia's phone buzzed with a call from an unknown number. Hello, Miss Bennett, a voice said. It was Dr. Wallace. I have recorded a full statement including names and dates. I am prepared to testify, Olivia asked. Why are you doing this now? He responded. Because showing mercy without revealing the truth is a form of cowardice. Also, Daniel came to see me 2 years ago asking for help to undo the damage he had helped create. He ran out of time to fix it. I won't, Olivia declared. A knock on the glass door startled them. Lena peeked outside and then let out a breath. It's her. Margaret stood in the hallway, her raincoat creased and her fingers clenched tightly around a manila envelope. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, but her gaze was firm. Let her in, Olivia said. Claire reached her hand across the table toward Olivia but hesitated, as if seeking permission. When Olivia didn't pull away, Claire gently rested her fingers on the back of Olivia's hand, a gesture that was more of an anchor than an embrace. I kept your room the same for years, Claire confessed, almost shyly. I put fresh sheets on the bed every Saturday. I kept telling myself that one day you might just walk through the door and tell me you were hungry. Olivia imagined a small bedroom painted in a cheerful, hopeful color, with a perfectly made bed and a window that had become accustomed to waiting. The thought was both painful and comforting. I like peanut butter on my toast, she said, the word surprising even herself. A lot of it. Claire let out a little laugh that quickly turned into a sob. The waitress kindly pretended not to see, simply refilling their coffee mugs as though sorrow was just another empty cup she could top off. Margaret walked into the main office area as if she were entering a sacred place, her shoulders slumped with the weight of her apologies. She held out the envelope. He wanted you to have this. I was too afraid. Inside was a key to a safe deposit box, the address of a bank in Providence, and a note written in Daniel's neat handwriting. If the contents of the desk drawer are not enough, box 312 will show her how sorry I am for my silence. Love and truth are identical when you follow them all the way. DB. Come with us, Olivia said to her. An hour later, inside a quiet bank that smelled of printer ink, a clerk slid open box 312. It contained mini DV tapes, a leather-bound notebook, and an old flip phone. Daniel had archived his evidence as meticulously as someone would file their taxes. Back at the newsroom, Lena managed to find a camcorder. The tape clicked with that soft rewinding sound, a noise Olivia now connected with bravery. Daniel's face appeared on the monitor. His hair was thinner, his smile looked weary, but his eyes were clear. If you are watching this, kiddo, it means I lost my courage before I ran out of time, he said. I trusted men with files who described theft as an act of mercy. I believed their lies until a woman named Claire Donovan shouted the truth in a hallway, and I watched as security guards dragged her past me. I have been trying to find my way back to that moment ever since. I met with Dr. Wallace. I hired a private detective. I sent a tip to the newsroom when I was too scared to tell you myself. I wrote down the names because those names are what kept you from your mother. If this revelation hurts you, it is supposed to. Pain is how your bones inform you of what has been broken. I loved you, Olivia, or Sarah, or both of you. I love the child who spilled juice on the couch and the reporter who asks better questions. I cannot return what I took from you, but you can reclaim your name. And please be kind to Margaret. She believed me because she had faith in us. The image on the screen froze and then turned blue. Margaret was sobbing. Claire reached her hand across the table. Olivia placed her hand over both of theirs. I will not choose between you, she said firmly. They have already taken enough from us, Claire whispered. Then we will all stand together, Margaret said, Tell me what I need to do. Olivia replied, Tell the truth alongside me. Lena came back with the copies and a legal pad. The Attorney General's office will meet with you at 9 a.m. Bring the original documents and Wallace's statement. We have hired an outside lawyer. The lab should have the preliminary DNA results by morning. They returned to Daniel's duplex to prepare their next steps. The city air smelled fresh and clean after the rain. On the desk, Olivia placed the hospital bracelet and the star pendant so that their circles were touching. Margaret made tea, her hands moving automatically from years of habit. Claire opened Daniel's notebook and began reading the names listed inside, the way some families might read from a prayer book. Hours passed amidst boxes and photocopies, and Margaret finally confessed everything. She spoke about the night Daniel brought the baby home, the lie he told about an emergency adoption, and the polite but menacing men who visited after his funeral. I believed that staying quiet would keep you safe, she said. But being quiet just made me feel small, Olivia replied, taking her hand. That's how they designed the system to work. She then turned to Claire. I can't give you back the years we lost, but I can give you the truth with my name attached to it. Claire's eyes filled with tears. That's all I ever wanted. Just before sunrise, as the streetlights began to turn off, Olivia typed the final sentence of her official statement. Lena quickly read it over. This reads like a spine, she commented. The burner phone rang. Olivia put it on speaker. It was a woman from the Attorney General's office. We have received your materials, she said. We are proceeding quickly. There is something you need to see when you get here. We've found a judge who signed off on several of the delayed filings, and we've also discovered a pattern of donations made to the hospital's foundation. Olivia looked down at the bracelet and pendant, their circles touching. She felt the rhythm of Daniel's tapping in her own pulse, a steady beat providing her with courage. We will be there at 9 a.m. During the drive to the bank, Margaret spoke in short, difficult bursts, each word like a heavy stone she had to lift with all her strength. I told myself a story, she said, that a mother had specifically chosen us. That love could somehow make the paperwork disappear. When Daniel began locking his office door, I realized that my story was starting to fall apart. The car stopped at a red light while a nearby church bell rang to mark the half hour. When he became ill, he tried to talk to me about it, Margaret continued, but every time he started to apologize, he would break down and I would just tell him, we'll talk later. And then there was no later left for us. No one in the car said a word. The only sound was the rhythmic clicking of the turn signal, like a metronome counting all the choices that had been made. As they were getting their coats to leave, Olivia stopped by Daniel's desk. She tapped the wood twice, their old signal, now met with only silence, and put the bracelet into her pocket. Outside, the Charles River flowed, dark and patient. When the sun came up, it would once again stretch the lights of Boston into shimmering ribbons on the water's surface. It was the same river she had watched on the night this all started, the night the microfilm machine hummed and history began to rewind. Except now, the reel was moving forward, and she was the one in control. They started walking toward the door when a soft hissing sound broke the silence as a piece of paper slid across the carpet. An unmarked envelope had been pushed under the threshold. Olivia bent down to pick it up, her heart pounding. Inside was a single document, the original, unredacted birth certificate. The name Sarah Claire Donovan was printed as clear as day. Attached was a yellow sticky note with tidy block letters that read room 417 wasn't the first. The Attorney General's office was located in a granite building where every footstep on the marble stairs echoed like a warning. Olivia held the unredacted certificate close to her chest, with Claire walking steadily beside her and Margaret following behind, carrying the weight of a lifetime on her shoulders. Inside, officials made copies of the files, cataloged the evidence, and listened to Dr. Wallace's recorded confession. The well-dressed man who had threatened them at the hospital was nowhere in sight, but his presence lingered in the cautious looks that the investigators exchanged. Olivia watched as her DNA swab was sealed in a bag and sent off to the lab. The clerk's voice was professional and routine, but Olivia's pulse raced with every word he spoke: mother, child, confirmation pending. After the meeting concluded, Claire squeezed Olivia's hand. "No matter what the test results say, I know who you are." Margaret's eyes welled up with tears. "I do too." That evening, back at the duplex, the three women gathered around Daniel's desk. The bracelet and the pendant lay next to each other, illuminated by the lamp's warm glow. The rain had stopped, and the normal sounds of city life, commuters, sirens, and laughter, hummed outside, its inhabitants unaware that a secret older than Olivia herself was finally being unraveled in that room. Claire opened Daniel's notebook one more time. He wrote down everything: names, money transfers, dates. He wanted this to happen. Olivia nodded. "He wanted me to see it through to the end," Margaret whispered. "And you will." Olivia stared at the false bottom of the desk drawer, the very place where her journey began. She remembered the magnifying glass, the key taped underneath, and the sound of static from the radio that night. She came to understand that the drawer had not only concealed her past, but had also provided her with the key to reclaim it. She leaned back in her chair, feeling exhausted but resolute. The truth was no longer hidden. It existed in the files, in the recorded voices, and in the bracelet and pendant. But most importantly, it now lived inside of her, refusing to be silenced any longer. The following morning, the DNA results came in. It was a positive match, 99.9%. Sarah Donovan, Olivia Bennett. Both names were now hers. Claire began to cry, pulling her into a hug that shook with 25 years of waiting. Margaret also reached out, hesitant at first, until Olivia took her hand and brought her into the embrace. For the very first time, the three of them held onto one another, not as adversaries separated by lies, but as survivors connected by the truth. Later, Olivia walked by herself along the Charles River, the same body of water she had looked out at from the newsroom window when all she had was a headline on microfilm. Now, the water reflected the first golden light of dawn, which stretched into trembling ribbons across the current. She thought about Daniel's voice on the tape. "Love and truth are the same thing when you walk them to the end." She thought of Claire's weekly ritual of changing the sheets in a room that was always waiting for her. She thought of Margaret's bedtime stories, the protective shield of being chosen that had kept her safe until her questions became too sharp to ignore. The city was waking up behind her, completely unaware. But somewhere in Providence, locked boxes were waiting. Somewhere in Boston, files remained in basements, and somewhere deep inside her, a new determination had firmly taken hold. She unclipped the hospital bracelet from her pocket and placed it on the railing. The river breeze gently lifted it, and the faded letters SA caught the morning light. Next to it, she set the star pendant. These two objects, once symbols of a theft, were now proof of her survival. "I'm both," she whispered to herself. "And I'm still here." She left them on the railing, not as lost items, but as things she was letting go of. Then, she walked forward with firm steps as the city opened up before her, because 25 years of silence were over. And the story that had started in room 417 was no longer theirs to keep buried.